City and visitors. 2 days ago was the anniversary of the 9/11 attack on New York City. For governments around the world and for too many people, it became a reason to unleash horrible death across the world in the name of freedom and in the name of revenge against 9/11. We are here today as part of a global vigil to close Guantanamo, the U.S. torture camp at Guantanamo Bay, maintained by the United States as a response to the attack on New York on 9/11. Dick Cheney and the other guy, George Bush, said they were going to start a war that would last generations and would have no boundaries. And indeed they did. What we marked 2 days ago was the beginning of the killing of at least 4.5 million people in the name of freedom by the United States and its allies. It was the beginning of 65 million people being displaced around the globe from the Middle East directly because of the U.S. so-called war on terror. We describe it as a war of terror on people, largely civilians who had nothing to do with the attack on the Pentagon or with the attack downtown here. Innocent civilians put into the war on terror by the decisions of this government. One of the most heinous decisions of this government was to set up the torture camp at Guantanamo in 2002. When it opened, hundreds of men began being brought to Guantanamo from all over the world, not just from Iraq or Afghanistan, two countries which had nothing to do with the attack on the World Trade Center or the Pentagon, by the way, but people who were picked up across Afghanistan and in Iraq largely because the U.S. started handing out bonuses of $5,000 for turning people in. That's who mostly was in Guantanamo for the first 5 to 10 years. 779 men, all Muslim, brought to Guantanamo over the span of a dozen years, none of whom had the benefit of the rule of law or any kind of procedure at the beginning to even know what the charges were against them, much less have legal support to fight those illegitimate charges. And now we're in a situation where I wager most people walking by, many people that I talk to think Guantanamo, Obama closed that a long time ago. No, he didn't. There are still 30 men held, almost all without any kind of charges, in Guantanamo, with no chance of getting out, quite frankly, in the near future. And any promises that President Biden has made to close Guantanamo are extremely unlikely to ever happen. We know this, why? Because the U.S. government has just invested hundreds of millions of dollars in upgrading Guantanamo.
Oh, wow.
Most of the men there, the majority right now, have already been cleared for release. But because they came from the country of Yemen, a country involved in a war, prosecuted by the Saudi Arabia with U.S. help, the U.S. says, oh, we can't send these men back to Yemen, and they won't let any other country take them. So 16 men, some of who have been cleared since the year 2010, are still held in Guantanamo, with essentially no legal rights to get out. That's just one of the problems. I hope people will read Guantanamo by the numbers, which we're handing out. This is not just a scandal against human rights. This is a situation where the United States has set a precedent for any other country that wants to avoid the rule of law, saying, hey, the US did it. The US is supposed to be the country that upholds freedom and democracy, so we can do whatever the hell we want to do. But all across the world, and this continues, people have been campaigning to close Guantanamo, campaigning for a way for these men unjustly detained to be released, and to demand that the so-called human rights champions in the United States of America actually stand up to what they say they believe in. This takes a movement of people all over the world. You can find out more at closeguantanamo.org and worldcan'twait.org. We are here every first Wednesday of the month, and we will be here demanding that the U.S. torture camp at Guantanamo be closed. And we're not just representing a few people. We're representing people of faith. We're representing thousands of attorneys who have worked on these cases over the years. We're representing people of goodwill all over the globe who want to see this prison closed. I'd like to invite Rosemary Pace, who represents the organization Pax Christi, to share a prayer for the closure of Guantanamo.
This prayer I'm going to be sharing was written by Sister Diana Ortiz. She herself was a victim of torture in Guatemala many years ago, and sadly has since died prematurely. But before that, she did found the Torture, Abolition, and Survivors Support Coalition. And in the corner of this printout I have, it says, when injustice becomes law, resistance becomes a duty. And that's why we're here. Jesus, giver of dignity, we look in the mirror of our souls, mindful of your words. What you have done to the least of my brothers, you have done to me. Once again, we have failed you. We have allowed seeds of fear to blind us to what is truly right and just. We have been duped by the luring words of our leaders to see our Guantanamo brothers as the worst of the worst. We have watched as our leaders impugn the truth that these men are a threat to national security and to the global community. How long, oh God, how long will we allow these men who have had no charges brought against them to be hidden away from our consciences and the requirements of our faith? How long, oh God, how long will we let them wither away in despair? A testament not to the promises of justice, but to the violation of the sacredness and dignity of the human person. In your name, we acknowledge that we have disgraced ourselves in our treatment of our Guantanamo brothers. In your name, we admit that we have encouraged seeds of hatred to despoil the garden of the common good. In your name, we recognize that we have played a role in tearing families apart. In your name, we confess that we have crucified you once again in our treatment of our Guantanamo brothers. Jesus, life of the living God, we have failed you, and we have failed one another. We ask for a forgiveness that will reach into the very prison cells of our brothers at Guantanamo. Only when we have done this may we turn and ask for forgiveness from you. Amen.
Thank you, Rosemary. I want to speak just a little bit to people who might think that Bush and Cheney were right when they said that the men detained in Guantanamo were the worst of the worst. Well, a whole bunch of them were farmers in Afghanistan. And they got turned in because somebody made $5,000 off of it. That's just frankly what happened. And the US military clearly and admittedly had no idea who they were rounding up. They didn't even get their names right for years in many cases. They didn't know what to do with them. Years and years later, Bush quietly started releasing people. But the US Congress was determined not to let anybody go because the leadership really believed these were the worst of the worst. And they set up a situation first where they had no legal advice, no legal representation. And then they came up with a scheme called the Military Commissions in 2006, which has never worked to actually yet convict or release anybody. One of the main reasons for that is because the people with the most serious charges, and this is just a few who have even been charged, cannot be tried under any system because, and the US admits this, they would have to use information gained under torture. The worst torture exposed that nearly killed people that was carried out in Guantanamo. So they don't want a trial. They want to just keep these people locked up with no charges. And yet, people around the world are saying you cannot hold people without charges. They got a big problem on their hands because it's exactly what they are doing. Do we understand the implication this is for the world when the biggest empire, the strongest government with the biggest military is able to hold people for decades with no charges? The implications of this are completely horrific. So even if Biden decided to close Guantanamo right now, even if they let everyone go, without a strong rebuke, this could be done again, and it probably is being done all over the world. And I wouldn't be surprised if people sitting in Washington are criticizing those other governments from doing the very thing that they're doing on an industrial scale. So hypocrisy, yes. Inhumanity, yes. Something we cannot ever accede to, yes. I want to call up the Raging Grannies to do a song. Just now, they're going to share the mic. We're going to get him over here. We might lower it down a little bit. Okay. This is the monthly global vigil to demand that the US government close Guantanamo, the US torture prison in Guantanamo. We're going to have some music from the Raging Grannies, who are indefatigable foes of injustice to humanity.
Detention is torture that
week left of our humanity. Guantanamo must be no more. Guantanamo must be no more. Raging Grannies in New York City. We'll be back. They'll be coming back. They have more energy than way too many people who are a lot younger than they are. I want to talk just for a moment so that people think the rest of the world is unaware of what's going on in Guantanamo. Know that they are mistaken. The United Nations recently sent an envoy who was allowed inside Guantanamo, which is quite interesting in itself. And she did a very thorough study inside and outside, talking to detainees, talking to attorneys, talking to the military, really trying to get inside of what was going on. And she put out a report 2 months ago that said in very restrained language that the whole enterprise of Guantanamo in detaining people was completely illegitimate. I mean, she was quite proper in the way she said this, and she had her facts and her documentation all lined up. But she said this should never have happened and it should end now. She said, yes, it's true that the detainees are now getting some better medical care than they used to. And there's a few other things that are a little better, like now occasionally they can talk to their relatives. But she said the basic premise of Guantanamo, of setting up an offshore prison away from US law, which excluded the government from being responsible for how people were being treated there, was illegitimate, unjust, and they needed to stop it. This is the United Nations saying this in a very quiet way. I read that and I said, okay, it's good you're saying that in a quiet way. We need to see it in a loud way. Close Guantanamo now. Okay, 3 presidents have already said this, and they claim their hands are tied. Congress won't let them. This or that problem. It's all bullshit. That's the technical term for what it is. All right? So I want to bring another person in addition to Rosemary and the grannies, the raging grannies up, who's kind of an expert on Guantanamo and human rights. Her name is Deidre Stiglitz, and she is on the national board of Amnesty International. She's been out here vigiling with us for months, and we really, really appreciate her being here. Deidre.
Thanks, Deborah. Thank you, Raging Grannies. Thanks, Rosemary. Thank you all for being here. Oh, that's great. Thank you. Hello, New York. My name is Deirdre Stiglitz, and I'm an activist with Amnesty International, which is a 7 million member strong global organization which has been leading human rights work for over 60 years. I'm currently serving on the board of directors of Amnesty International USA, and I'm also a member of the local Amnesty chapter here in New York City, Group 11, and the North Jersey local group. I'm here to talk about the US military prison at Guantanamo Bay Naval Base in Cuba, which is also known as Gitmo. Amnesty International has been campaigning globally for the closure of Guantanamo prison since the US opened it 2 decades ago in January of 2002. during the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. Guantanamo represents grave violations of human rights by the United States government. It's a glaring, long-standing stain on the human rights record of the United States. The US government created the prison at Guantanamo to detain people outside the reach of the law after the attacks of September 11th, 2001. As we get closer to the 22nd year of existence as a center of indefinite detention, Gitmo continues to hold 30 Muslim men, most without charge, none having received a fair trial. Many of these men, like Tawfiq al-Bahani, were tortured by the United States government. There has been no accountability in the United States for the significant violations of human rights law that have been perpetuated and perpetrated by the United States, including torture, enforced disappearances, and a complete lack of due process. 16 of the detainees, including al-Bahani, have been cleared for transfer to other countries, yet they remain here in Guantanamo behind bars without charges or a trial. There are no apparent plans to actually transfer them out. 10 of them are awaiting trial in military commissions. These US military commissions are a way that the United States government is circumventing our own Constitution. 16 of the detainees, including al-Bahani, oh, I just said that part, sorry. President Biden and his predecessor, Obama, campaigned on, skipping Trump, campaigned on the promise that he would put human rights at the center of his foreign policy. He said he supports closing this notorious site of torture and indefinite detention, but we have seen little progress, and it remains open today. President Biden now only has a short window of time left in his term to begin to right the massive wrong that this detention facility at Guantanamo Bay represents. We need President Biden to take action during this critical window of opportunity to end this ongoing abuse of human rights by closing the detention center once and for all, and he needs to move quickly to do it before the end of his term. We're here today to ask you to help to get us to close Guantanamo and ensure the transfer of all the clear detainees to countries where their human rights will be respected. We urge you to act now. Please tell President Biden to shut down the Guantanamo Bay detention facility right away. Amnesty International's goal is for the Biden administration to finally close Guantanamo and to transfer or release the men who are detained there. If there is sufficient admissible evidence to prosecute any of the men for internationally recognizable criminal offenses, then the US government should do so in a federal court, adhering to the standards for a fair trial and without recourse to the death penalty, of course. So I know this is a little redundant. I'm just going to reiterate the talking points and goals for Amnesty in regard to Guantanamo. 1, the military prison at Guantanamo Bay represents grave violations of human rights by the US government. 2, 21 years after it opened as a way to avoid the requirements of US law, Guantanamo continues to hold 30 Muslim men, most without charge, none having received a fair trial. 3, the existence of an offshore prison for Muslim men who are denied due process of law is a blatant example and encouragement of Islamophobia and racism by the United States government. 4, Guantanamo is a stain on the human rights record of the United States. 5, the continued existence of Guantanamo and indefinite detention severely undermines the United States' credibility as an advocate for human rights globally. 6, the United States must reckon with its post-9/11 human rights abuses, and that must include closing Guantanamo. 7, maybe, I don't know, I lost track. Indefinite detention without charge or fair trial is a blatant violation of international human rights. And finally, the Guantanamo military commissions have failed to bring justice to the victims and survivors of the 9/11 attacks, while denying due process to the accused. Thank you all for listening. Please contact President Biden, your representatives, your mayor, your neighbor, your friend, your mom, anybody you know, your doctor. Tell them we need to close Guantanamo now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deidre. Thank you. That's hashtag close Guantanamo. I want to speak just for a moment about the more than 700 men who have been released from Guantanamo. Well, first of all, 9 of them died in prison. 3 in 2006 under very suspicious circumstances that the government called suicide. A couple have died just from old age. But the rest who have been released, this is a really difficult story. They've been sent all over the world, mostly not back home. And some of the ones who did get sent back home have been re-imprisoned and treated very badly, again, without access to legal redress. But the US sent people to countries like Ecuador and Serbia. They sent Muslim men to places where they didn't know anybody, and they would not allow their families to join them. They have not had adequate medical care. You destroyed somebody's life without reason, and then they have no medical care, no recourse to get life back. Not enough money to marry and raise a family after losing maybe a decade of your life, unjustly. This is all a continuing outrage, and it doesn't just go away because a president makes a speech and says, we're for human rights, rah, rah. Hasn't worked out that way in any sense. And this is the fruit of 9/11. Has something to do with why we're out here today. 9/11 became an excuse for the United States to go after countries that they wanted to go after and to establish domination and empire. We're not going to stop talking about that. I want to invite poem dancer up, Cleo, who's a beautiful singer, and she's prepared a song related to the closure of Guantanamo. Get this down.
I don't want my thing into her. Okay? Yeah, this way. Hello, you can hear me? Hello. Guantanamo. ballet, but her heart was with Cuba all the way. The island of Cuba is the island of the Lord. Take Cuba off the terror list. Cuba is no terrorist. And close Guantanamo. Oh, let the prisoner go. When Fidel liberated Cuba from Amigo del Norte, Dictadora Batista, Alicia returned to her native land to dance as a Fidelista. The island of Cuba is the island of the law of love. Take Cuba off the U.S. list. Cuba is no terrorist. And close Guantanamo. With Fidel by her side, Alicia had the chance to teach Cuban orphans to dance. With Ballet de Cuba, this is no land of terror, where dance is the national treasure. The island of Cuba is the island of the law of love. Take Cuba off the U.S. list. Cuba is no terrorist. And close Guantanamo. On the Cuban ballet, the dancers on the scene have every body type and color of skin, from short to tall, from round to thin. In Cuba, ballet is a dance for every person. The island of Cuba is the island of the law of love. Take Cuba off the U.S. list. Cuba is no terrorist. And close Guantanamo. Let the innocent go. The U.S. exports weapons and war. Isn't that more like state-sponsored terror? Cuba exports doctors and medical care. Cuban doctors are in demand everywhere. The island of Cuba is the island of the law of love. Take Cuba off the U.S. list. Cuba is no terrorist. And close Guantanamo. Close Guantanamo. Let the innocent go. Torture no. Thank you.
This is the monthly global vigil to close Guantanamo, taking place in London, Mexico City, LA, other places that are just starting up. You can join where you are, and you should. We're bringing the message from the belly of the beast. Oh yeah, we vigil in Washington, D.C. as well. That the U.S. has got to close down this torture camp in Guantanamo. You thought it was closed because Obama said he wanted to close it? It was his first executive order. Did not happen. It did not happen. There are still 30 men there. And the facilities are being expanded. The facilities are being made new. Millions of dollars are being spent to improve the facilities. President Trump said he wanted to fill it up again. He didn't have the chance the first time. I don't know what the implications are for the future. But we are determined to stand with people all over the world and raise this demand to close Guantanamo. I'd like to call up the Raging Grannies, and I hope they will sing their anthem, Guantanamo, Shut It Down. Is that possible? It's possible, all right.
Guantanamo, let's shut it down. Shut it down. That's your part. Shut it down. Guantanamo, let's shut it down. No charges, no trials, brutal and vile. Guantanamo, let's shut it down. Sing with us. Guantanamo, let's shut it down. Shut it down. Shut it down. Guantanamo, let's shut it down. Filthy and dirty, let's free the 30. Guantanamo, let's shut it down. Sing with us. Guantanamo, let's shut it down. Shut it down. Shut it down. Guantanamo, let's shut it down. Torn from family, held in misery. Guantanamo, let's shut it down. Guantanamo, let's shut it down. What? Shut it down. What? Shut it down. Guantanamo, let's shut it down. Endless grief, no hope for release. Guantanamo, let's shut it down. One more time. Guantanamo, what? Let's shut it down. Shut it down. Shut it down. Guantanamo, let's shut it down. Our taxes pay. We say no way. Guantanamo, let's shut it down. Thank you, the New York City Raging Grannies.
This is the monthly global vigil to close Guantanamo. That's the U.S. prison torture camp on the island of Cuba. The U.S. set it up in 2002. That's 22 years ago. And some of the people that came in right after that are still there, never having been convicted or in some cases even charged with a crime. How does that happen in the land of freedom and democracy? It got sold because the U.S. was attacked on 9/11. And they claim that a few of the prisoners have a connection to that. It could be true. But the way they have gone about prosecuting them probably will never bring the truth out. Why? Because first they were tortured, some of them for years in third countries, in so-called black sites. They were tortured for years, waterboarded. This was Dick Cheney's list of what was going to be approved torture. And because of that, the U.S. now can't bring a case in court because why? Actually, a military judge 2 weeks ago, since our last vigil, just said, we can't go forward with this. Either the U.S. has to tell the truth about the torture of these Muslim men, or they can't use the evidence against them. And without that evidence, they can't get a conviction. So they've really screwed this up royally, but the bigger problem is they've screwed up humanity royally. This is used an example of what a powerful government can get away with, as they are doing around the world. And Guantanamo is certainly not the only example. We would be here all day, and we could be here continually, talking about the American crimes carried out by freedom and democracy around the world. But we will be here every first Wednesday. The next time we're here is Wednesday, October 2nd, from 5 to 6 p.m. Follow closeguantanamo.org. Find us with the hashtag #CloseGuantanamo. Join in. Bring your own signs. Write your own songs. Take your own actions. We would love to have you join us and be part of this great cause for human rights. It's so important that people speak out and speak up and make the connections with what's going on around the world. We are responsible because we live here in the United States, whether we're citizens or not. We're responsible for stopping this crime against humanity. Would you like to sing one more poem, Dancer? the end of this month's monthly vigil to close the U.S. prison torture camp at Guantanamo. We're very happy to close it out with some joy and beautiful singing, referencing Cuba, where the U.S. has imprisoned waves of people, Haitians, who they imprisoned saying that they had HIV. A lot of terrible things have been carried out by the U.S. empire there. But we're here specifically to demand the closure of the Guantanamo prison camp. Our next vigil is Wednesday, October 4th. I made a mistake before. Wednesday, October 4th from 5 to 6 p.m. And we call on people to join us, demanding the U.S. close the prison torture camp at Guantanamo, release those men already cleared for release as long as 13 years ago, 16 of them, and give the others a legitimate trial somewhere, not offshore. Good night, everybody.